All right, welcome back. President Trump has given Hamas a Sunday deadline to accept his 20-point peace plan for Gaza. Hamas has agreed to immediate talks on a hostage release, according to Trump's plan, but has stopped short of accepting the full proposal. In response, Israel says it's preparing for the first phase of the ceasefire plan that will possibly end the almost 2-year-old war now. CNN's Oren Lieberman is with us, along with Andrew Miller, former Deputy Secretary of State for Israeli-Palestinian Affairs in the Biden administration. Good to see both of you. Oren, you first. What happens if this deadline is not met, or at least what is a scenario right now?
Well, it seems like the starting of negotiations here, which appear to be imminent, effectively pushes the deadline at least a little bit. But President Donald Trump has also made it clear that these talks, these discussions to try to finalize a deal should not drag on for weeks. He clearly wants this to happen, and he wants it to happen quickly. The fact that these are incredibly sensitive issues and that many of these gaps have not been bridged before, he's not so concerned about that. He wants to see results. That's part of the reason we saw him put so much pressure on Israel and effectively called on Israel to stop its bombing of Gaza, which really forced Israel's hands. In the past, Israel had said it would only negotiate with Hamas under fire, meaning it would continue bombarding Gaza as a way of attempting to put military pressure on Hamas. Well, Trump effectively put an end to that with one post on social media. So now we have the sorts of ceasefire movements that we've been looking for weeks, if not months. And the question is, will they come to fruition? U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, they're on their way to the region to try to get these talks going and begin a process here. We are expecting to hear from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was scheduled to give a statement about 25 minutes ago. That's a bit behind here. So we're waiting to see that and what he will say as he prepares Israel's own delegation to head to these talks. That will be led by one of his closest confidants, Ron Dermer. Crucially, we are now seeing the first responses from his far-right coalition partners, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir, and they are slamming this agreement. Smotrich says it is weakness to negotiate with Hamas, not under fire, while Itamar Ben-Gvir says that he will quit the government if Hamas continues to exist. Well, that's a fundamental part of Trump's peace plan, that any member of Hamas who agrees to commit to live in peaceful coexistence with Israel will be granted amnesty. So it's hard to see how he's going to stomach this agreement. And that causes problems for Netanyahu that we'll see play out here, Fred.
Okay. Oren Lieberman, thank you so much. I want to bring in now Andrew Miller, former Deputy Secretary of State for Israeli-Palestinian Affairs in the Biden administration. Good to see you. So, in your view, how much pressure is Netanyahu facing domestically right now with this deal kind of hanging in the balance?
I think there has been substantial domestic pressure on Netanyahu, both from the far right, as Oren was just describing, and the general public, which is in the diametrically opposed position for some time now. But that hasn't affected Netanyahu's calculus, or at least he's prioritized maintaining his coalition over popular support. And there are no means for the public to force out Netanyahu without the cooperation of other parties in his coalition, potentially bringing it down. What may be more significant than the Israeli reaction is President Trump's reaction. If Netanyahu is seen as losing President Trump's support, that very well could lead to the demise of his coalition, in addition to the possibility that he moves forward with this agreement in the way that it was originally articulated and proposed, and both Smotrich and Ben-Gvir decide to leave the coalition. In that case, I'm confident that opposition Israeli leaders would join in order to buck up the government and allow them to move forward, but that will bring us closer to early elections in Israel, which Netanyahu wants to avoid.
Is there anything that you're reading into the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu with this latest sequence of events? Seemingly, it became very public by way of, Truth Social and other means, and it almost infers that Netanyahu would learn about this, be the last one to learn about what was happening.
I think we've seen ups and downs in the Trump-Netanyahu relationship dating back to President Trump's first term in office as well. If you'll recall, when Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden in 2020, Trump had some very choice words to say about Netanyahu, but they were able to continue in good rapport when Trump returned to office. We're definitely at one of those downswings where Trump seems to be very frustrated with Netanyahu. The proximate cause was the reckless Israeli airstrike on Doha, attempting to eliminate Hamas negotiators, but taking place in a country that is a non-NATO ally of the United States did not sit well with him. We've seen this before, though, from President Trump. The question is, does he sustain this level of attention? There's always a question about whether he's going to remain focused. If he does focus, he's the one person who can apply the necessary pressure on Netanyahu to break through these log jams. But if he loses interest, or Netanyahu is able to persuade him that the Hamas position is unreasonable, then Netanyahu could very well wriggle out of this dilemma.
And from diplomacy tactics standpoint, what are you reading into or deciphering from the special envoy Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner arriving or heading to Egypt? Does this indicate a level of, this is imminent, or confidence?
It doesn't necessarily indicate confidence, but it indicates a level of commitment and prioritization. Witkoff and Kushner would not be going if President Trump wasn't serious about trying to get this done. It's also significant that the talks are taking place in Egypt because the Egyptians have better relations with the Hamas military leadership, whereas Qatar's relationship with Hamas tend to be political. What we've heard from the Wall Street Journal reporting is that the political wing wants to cut this deal under any conditions, whereas the military wing has some reservations. By Witkoff and Kushner going to Egypt and putting pressure on Israel, putting pressure on Egypt, the pressure Hamas. They're trying to create that pressure cooker environment, which could lead to a breakthrough, but all depends on the positions that Hamas and Israel are going to take. Is Hamas going to look at this as simply a negotiation over the immediate conditions for a release of hostages, following which there will be post-conflict discussions, which is Israel's preference, or are they going to insist on resolving everything up front? If it's the latter, we're not going to wind up in an agreement, and I think we'll see a quick restoration of the fighting, unfortunately.
All very fascinating. You've taken us into the many rooms here. Andrew Miller, thank you so much. Appreciate it.